Seems that everyone is here right now, so let's get started. Thanks for your attendance, all of you. Some of you will already have a copyright license with us, whereas some of you may not yet have a license. But we'll just talk about both things. So what we'll be discussing today is some of the fundamentals of copyright law. So what can you do and what can you not do in the workplace, and we'll talk about some common copyright myths. Then we'll talk a bit about copyright agency and what we do, and about our partnership with PRC. And then we'll talk a bit about the actual content access license, so the license that allows you to copy and share content more freely. So let's get started with some of these fundamentals of copyright law. Copyright law is actually laid out internationally in the Berne Convention. That sets an international framework for copyright globally. Australia has been part of that for a long time now, and most Western countries are a part of this Berne Convention. And part of this Berne Convention is to make sure that copyright law is recognized in most countries and also is set out quite similarly in most countries. In Australia itself, copyright law is actually federal legislation. It's laid out in the Copyright Act 1968. So it's not to be taken too lightly. Copyright is a bundle of rights, and that's controlled by the copyright owner. Now, what these rights are, we'll talk about some more in the next couple of slides. But in a nutshell, the copyright owner has moral rights as well as the economic rights of copying and sharing. So if you do not have permission from the copyright owner, it means you cannot copy or share the content that they have written. But as I mentioned, we'll talk about it in a moment some more. Copyright protects a whole range of materials, so think of TV broadcasts, films, music, and so on. But what's used most in the business sector is literary works, and that's what we're talking about today. If you are interested in finding out some more about, for instance, music, you can speak to EPRA MCOS, which is a sort of a sister organization to what we do. And for broadcast, it will be screen rights. But as I mentioned, what we're here to talk about today is literary works, such as books, newspapers, journals, etc. Copyright doesn't necessarily protect an ID, so if you tell me about an ID you may have for a book, and I then take that ID and actually write down an entire book, I actually own the copyright in that book because I've written it down and I've actually expressed it in a material form. So just mentioning an ID to someone is not protected by copyright. It may well be protected by something else like confidentiality, but not by copyright in itself. Copyright is automatic, so if you see that copyright logo there in the middle, you don't actually require that for copyright to apply to a certain work. So if you are, for instance, online and you don't see that copyright logo, it doesn't mean that that work is not in copyright. It's automatically protected by copyright. So if you want to reuse it, you would have to seek permission from the copyright owner. And also for yourself, if you ever write something that you think is of importance, what you can do is always put that little notice there and write your company name there and when it was produced, so that people just know that you think it is important, that it is protected. But even so, if you don't do it, it's also protected, but by putting that notice there, you're just reinforcing that, and it also shows other people your intent. And copyright lasts a long time, so basically anything that you're using on a daily basis within your daily workflow will still be protected by copyright, because copyright lasts 70 years, starting from the 1st of January after the creator has passed away. So if someone passed away in 1970, that work is still in copyright 70 years later. So that's 2014, so a long time. Now, what are some of the very important elements from the Copyright Act that we need to discuss today? The first one is reproducing and communicating. So for any of these acts, you would need to seek permission from the copyright owner. So reproducing is the act of copying. So there could be anything ranging from scanning, photocopying, taking a screenshot, or in this day and age, taking a photo with your iPhone or something. So if you don't have the permission from the copyright owner, you can't do those activities. The same thing goes for communicating. If you want to communicate content to someone, you will need to seek permission. Now there's two different types of communicating. There's active communication, so that means sending someone an email or faxing someone something. Or there's passive communication, such as publishing a newspaper on your website, for instance, or on an extranet, internally on your intranet, and hoping that someone actually comes along and reads that content. So for those two things, reproducing and communicating, you will always need to have permissions in place before you can do that with other people's content. So those two are called the economic rights that the copyright owner has, and then you also have the moral rights that the copyright owner has. So the moral rights are more or less the right not to be taken out of context, the right to be attributed, and that sort of thing. So if you copy and paste something from somewhere, well, firstly you need to seek permission to be able to do so, but also you would need to reference where you got that information from. Then the last important thing from the Copyright Act is the substantial part. So what's already protected by copyright in Australia is what's called the substantial part. So basically anything that's distinctive. And that's not easy to put into a percentage. People often say, oh, you can copy up to 10%, but that's actually not true. What you can copy is what's called the substantial part. And if you take a newspaper article and you copy and paste the two lines that are most important to you and basically sum up the entire article, you're probably already using a substantial part. So in that case, you would already need to seek permission from the copyright owner before you can do that. For those of you that already have a license, all of this stuff you can actually do with the license. So you're actually doing the right thing now by having a license. You can do all this in your daily workflow. But if you do not have it, it's quite likely that you do this sort of activity on a daily basis. What are some of the other key components of the Copyright Act? The statute of limitations in Australia is 6 years. Now what that means in simple English is if you infringed copyright 5.5 years ago and the copyright owner finds out now, they can still take action up to 6 years after the act happens. So copyright infringement can actually be done retrospectively for up to 6 years. And the other thing is also copyright liability is strict. So even if you had good intentions or you thought you were doing the right thing, you misinterpreted the rules, you will still be liable for copyright infringement. It just differs in the amount of damages you may need to pay. So if you're flagrantly disregarding copyright law because you knew the rules, the damages may be a lot higher. But still, even if you do it inadvertently, you would still be liable for copyright infringement. Now, how does this affect you in the daily workplace? So think, for instance, all the digital communication devices you have in this day and age. So you can, for instance, print something from the net or from an attachment. You can scan in articles, you can download, you can post articles to an intranet website so that everyone has access to it. Emailing happens an awful lot this time. Pasting things in reports, taking a screenshot and sending it through, simply copying and pasting in an email and sending it through. So all those activities you will need to have permission for before you can do it. Similarly for external use, so think for instance of posting it to an internet website or emailing it to your clients. For all those activities you will need to have permissions in place. And obviously for the hard copying as well, so think of photocopying and faxing. Now, usually people believe they know the copyright rules, and some of them may, but we often come across quite a few copyright myths, so it always helps to go through those in a slide. And it's not just normal people like us that often don't know these rules. It's oftentimes also people within law firms or internal counsels. We did a session recently with a big mining company, and there were about 10 lawyers in the room, and in this slide we go through about 8 or 9 copyright myths, and then afterwards the head of legal stood up and he said, oh, I actually thought 6 of them were true. So it's very common for people to believe in these copyright myths, so therefore it's a good exercise to go through this and make sure that you actually know that they're not true. So the first one is downloading and sharing of material is okay when it's for research or study. There is actually a fair dealing exception in the Copyright Act that allows certain types of copying for research or study. But you cannot rely on this in a commercial organization. It's more for students and so on. So if you're doing it as part of a commercial organization, you won't be able to rely on this. As long as you name the source, it's fine. This is sort of what we discussed before with the moral rights and the economic rights. So as long as you name the source, you're covering off the moral rights that the copyright owner has, but you're not covering off the economic rights. So you would still need to seek permission to be able to reproduce or to share the content. We often hear this one. I found it online, so it's in the public domain, right? Actually, those two things are quite different. So online is just a sharing platform in a way, and it is automatically protected by copyright. So as we mentioned before, you don't need to have that copyright logo for copyright to be in play. And the public domain is actually quite something else. The public domain is when someone has waived their copyright, or when the work is out of copyright because the 70-year period has lapsed. So unless someone has specifically mentioned, feel free to reuse this in a commercial setting, which is quite rare, or once it's out of copyright, you can use it for free and without seeking permission. But that hardly ever occurs in the daily workflow, because most of the content that you reuse in this day and age would be newspapers and magazines, and they would still be in copyright, and they would also not say feel free to reuse this in a commercial setting. The story is about us, or we advertise with a publisher, so we have an implied license. This happens quite often, that people believe, oh, we have a good relationship with this publisher, so we can actually reproduce the works that they create. Now, in some limited instances, that may actually be the case, but if you do believe that to be such, always make sure you have that in writing, because just believing that it's that way and then it turns out not to be so, that can still make you liable for copyright infringement. Another instance is where you, for instance, have produced a media release and it's literally taken over in a newspaper article. That hardly, well, that shouldn't really happen all that often, but if it's literally the same, you probably still own the copyright, and therefore you wouldn't need to seek permission. But journalists are usually quite well trained, and they are trained to put the media release into their own words, and in that way they actually own the copyright as well. So you just have to be mindful, even though they used your media release to actually publish that article and write the article, you would still need to seek permission, because they already have produced what's called an original work, and therefore you would need to seek permission again. It's okay if you only use 10%, so this is what we covered off before with that substantial part. So it's not a quantitative measure, it's a qualitative measure. So if you take the two most important lines, it may well be that it's a substantial part, and sometimes it could be more than 10%, but that's quite rare, I imagine. But as soon as something is substantial and distinctive, you would already need to seek permission. It's okay because we are not making a profit. It's actually the other way around. It's not okay because then the publisher cannot make profit, or the journalist can't make a profit of giving you permission through a license to reproduce their work. I paid for it, so I can copy and share it. So we have this all the time when people say, oh, I bought a newspaper, so now I can copy it and scan it and email it through to my clients, right? It's actually not the case. You can do with a physical copy what you want. So if you find a nice article in there, you can actually cut it out or hand it out to people, hang it up on your wall. But again, the act of then reproducing it or sharing it after reproducing it, you would still need to seek permission. And then this is probably the most common one in the media, in the agency sector. I am covered for copyright through my media monitoring agency. I've actually made up this next slide that talks about this. So press clipping agencies, and the most famous one will be Isentia. You also have Gary and Madison and My Media. They're from Tasmania and WA. But they actually charge copyright fees every time they send you a media clip. Now that fee is set out in two ways. Firstly, they'll charge $1.31 plus GST, and that actually allows them to send the article to you, so they are covering off their own copyright obligations. Now on top of that, we may also have a downstreaming in place, which is 51 cents, and that allows you, if you have a media agency that supplies you with clips, it allows you to internally email, so only internally email, and to store the articles for a period of up to 6 months. So the base rate is 51 cents plus GST, and that allows you to share it with up to 50 users internal to your organization, so not with your clients. Oftentimes people think, oh, there's a copyright fee, so we can actually share this with our clients as well. But that's a common misconception. So if you look at that section over there, if you want to send it externally to your clients, or post the articles on your website, or want to send it through to more of the nominated users, or store it longer than the 6 months, you would actually need to seek further permission before you can do so. Otherwise, you're probably in breach of copyright. So that's how that is laid out. If you have any questions about this, please hold on until the end when we have some time as well for questions, and I can go deeper into it. Also note, those for you that have a license, if you do pay that 51 cents, you actually don't need to pay that anymore if you have a license, because that 51 cents allows you to internally email and store it for up to 6 months. But with a license, you actually have those rights in place already. So if you do pay that 51 cents, still just let Icentia or your media clipping agency know that you have a license with us, and they will stop charging you that 51 cents. Another form of getting clips is web scraping. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's not as common yet as the good old media clippings, but basically it's providing links to content and also behind the paywall, together with a headline and then a snippet of the text. Now, as that snippet of the text is already a substantial part, these web scraping providers, which are Meltwater and Icentia, they actually pay a copyright fee so that they can actually send that to their clients. But you have to be mindful that no downstreaming component is in place, so that's that 51 cent component that we saw previously, that allows you to internally share it and so on. So if you do receive them and you want to share that internally, you would have to have other permissions in place already. And the most easy one of that is obviously the copyright license that we have, and what we'll be discussing in a bit. Now, why is copyright so important in this modern day and age? Well, firstly, sharing has become a lot easier, whereas in the olden days you only had a photocopier available to basically copy and hand out copies. In this day and age you have so many devices with which you can copy and share. Think of your iPhone, printers, faxes, internet, email, and everyone can share so easily and hardly ever think about it anymore, that actually copyright infringement occurs a lot more now than it has ever in the past. Now the publishers have also noticed this because their subscriptions have gone down, and they just noticed that their articles are reused everywhere. So they have actually given the copyright agency specific mandate, firstly to license on their behalf in the commercial sector. So we've been doing that for the last 10-15 years or so. But also it has included a mandate to actually assess different industries for possible infringements. And infringements happen all the time because it's so easy to copy and share content in this day and age. And oftentimes people don't know the rules or believe they know the rules, so they think that they're actually doing the right thing, whereas they may actually not be doing the right thing. And it didn't come lightly that the copyright agency did start to follow up on infringements. Usually what happens is the copyright agency goes to an industry body and tries to get a partnership happening, like for instance in the public relations industry with the PRA and now the PRC, and tries to raise awareness about this, but it didn't really work and people were still not taking notice. So then the publisher said, listen, you have to start following up on these infringements because it's getting out of hand. So over the last 2 years the copyright agency has been quite active in that sense. And over 550 organizations have actually been fined for copyright infringement, and that can range from anywhere between $400 to sometimes $300,000, so it can be quite substantial. We also try and raise awareness about copyright in newspapers, so you may have seen that little ad there on the right hand side in, for instance, the Australian Financial Review or the Sydney Morning Herald. And sometimes that brings in calls of people saying, oh, what is this? I didn't know about this. So it seems to work quite well. And also, a lot of publishers in this day and age are actually using PDF tracking software. And one of the most famous ones is Getty Images. They have a software in place and that trolls the net. So if you, on your blog, on your website for instance, have a photo and you don't have the right permissions in place, and they are actually the copyright owner of that photo, they will actually send you an infringement notice, and that can be quite high. I've been speaking recently to about 5 different PR agencies, and they were fined for about $900 just for the use of one photo. So if you do put photos on your blog, make sure you have the right permissions in place. And then there's also a website called copywatch.org. This is basically an employee promulgate website. So that means people can report copying of content without a license. And this happens more often than you think, because copyright actually affects about 1 million people in Australia. Think for instance of movies, TV, radio, literary works, publishing, newspapers, and also ancillary services like printing, for instance. All those people are reliant on copyright in some way to be able to make a living. So if your partner is a journalist and you see that your company is constantly infringing and don't take care of making sure there are permissions in place, you may well be inclined, you may well be inclined to actually report that. Now, here are some handy tips and tricks for the digital age, because even though we have a license in place that allows you to copy and share, it doesn't include social media. So if you do want to share content on social media, we always say, why don't you use the sharing devices that are on the websites? So look at those buttons there. And oftentimes what happens is it comes up with a little preview of the article, and also it has a little snippet. And that little snippet may well be a substantial part, but since the publisher allows you to do it this way, they are giving you an implied license to do such. So if you do ever want to share content online, the best way is to do this. But if such sharing options are not available, what you can just use is to link to it. And if you post that link on the website, you're not infringing copyright, because there's no such thing as copyright in the link, because you're not actually pasting content. Now, if you do this, make sure to not copy and paste the first couple of lines, for instance, of the article. But what we do always recommend is just put in your own words why this is a relevant article. So say, oh, one of our clients was mentioned in this article because of this and this. And then in that way you'll be fine, and you don't have to worry about copyright infringement. And if you really want to put something up online, but there is no link available because it's only available on hard copy, for instance, and you do want to post it on your Facebook or LinkedIn or something like that, or any other social media platform, just seek permission from the publisher directly, and quite often they are happy to give you permission. Also, images, they are not really included in our license. So standalone images, so if you just want to use an image from somewhere, you have to make sure you have the appropriate permissions in place. And what that means is, if you buy, for instance, a stock image through a stock image website, and you say it's for internal use in the presentation only, and you then put it up on your blog, you can still be infringing copyright that way. A good thing to note is that photographs before 1955 are actually out of copyright. Just be mindful that if there is a movie about the Second World War, the actual Second World War was obviously before 1955, but the movie is probably afterwards. So if they take a still photo from that movie, that's obviously taken after 1955. So in that case, it's still in copyright, and you need to seek permission. But generally speaking, if you look at, for instance, World War I and World War II photos, they are out of copyright, and therefore you can reproduce them without having to seek permission. Obviously, you would still need to look after the moral rights and so on, but you can reproduce them. There's also a movement recently that's called the Creative Commons movement. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but basically it's a movement that says we think it's important to share information, and that our information can be shared as well. So there are about, I think at the moment, about 8 different Creative Commons licenses. So it's basically just a notice with your work that says feel free to reuse this without having to seek permission, and that's basically because they want to share the knowledge that they have. However, most of them are only available for non-commercial use. So if you do it as part of a commercial organization, I think at the moment there's only 3 of such notices that you can rely on to reuse in a commercial organization. So just be very careful if you do rely on those. And there's also a second reason why you have to be careful when you're relying on Creative Commons notices, because what has happened in the past quite a bit is that people have taken photos from somewhere without even being the copyright owner themselves, and they have then put a Creative Commons notice on it, and if you then rely on that Creative Commons notice, you may still inadvertently be breaching copyright of the original copyright owner, simply because that person didn't own the copyright and slept on that notice. So always be very careful to do your due diligence if you do rely on a notice that says please feel free to reuse this, because quite often it may actually not be the case that they own the copyright of it. Now, what is a simple solution for all this copying and sharing in your workplace? That's to have a copyright license with the copyright agency. But who actually is the copyright agency? So the copyright agency is a not-for-profit management organization of licensing rights. So we were appointed by the Attorney General to look after the licensing in the educational sector and in the governmental sector. And that was 41 years ago, actually. So we've been around for a long time. So what we do is we collect licensing fees from schools, universities, TAFEs, governments, etc. And we pay that back to the copyright owners whose content has been used. So in a sense, we are like a bridge. So we say, people feel free to reproduce and share content, but pay us a license fee, and we'll then pay that back to the copyright owners whose work you're using. On top of just licensing, we also educate and raise awareness, so that's what we're doing here today. But we also consult and engage with industry bodies like the PRC and enter into partnerships with them. Of the money that we bring in on a yearly basis, about 85% of that gets returned to the copyright owners. I think at the moment it's actually 86%. So we just take a small operational cut. So what we do is we have about, I think, 100 people working here, but we also liaise with people that run surveys on our behalf. So every year we go into about 125 different schools and say, whatever you copy for a certain period, give us an extra copy and tell us how often you copied it. It comes into our building, and what we then do is we research that data. So we work out who is the copyright owner, and then at the end of that whole process, we pay the money that we collected back to the copyright owners. And who are some of these copyright owners that we then pay? Well, we have 26,000 members, and a member is basically someone that has signed up to be able to get paid by us. Becoming a member is for free, so you don't need to pay for that. So now these members are split up in traditional creators. So as you may well understand, authors and journalists, publishers, and so on, they all own copyright, and they have been paid by us. But you also have non-traditional copyright owners. So it could be, for instance, your own PR agency. So if you produce a nice blog on your website and it comes up in one of our surveys that it has been reused by another organization or somewhere in a TAFE or in a school, and people actually contact you and say, listen, we noticed that your work has been reused. Would you like to have a payment for that? Because that's what you're entitled to. And oftentimes people say, yes, of course we do. So in that process over the years, over 41 years, we now have 26,000 members that have been paid by us because the works have been used. And also these 26,000 members have given us the mandate then to license on their behalf in the commercial sector as well. So when we talk about that license later, all these 26,000 members have given us permission for us to license on their behalf. So if you think of these members, for instance, if you look at some of the publisher members, for instance, Fairfax, with all their hundreds and hundreds of publications at News Corp and Bauer in the magazine sector, all of them with a license with the copyright agency, you can actually copy and share content that they produce. The same with business journals and so on. Traditional textbook publishers and some industry-specific publications as well. So in Australia, basically any sort of publisher you can think of, they are probably a member of the copyright agency. And if you then hold a license, you can rely on that to copy and share their works. Now, in Australia, all federal and state government actually have a copyright license, and the same goes for all universities, schools, and TAFEs. So they all have a copyright license. The same thing for associations and training bodies. Most RTOs have a license, a lot of associations have licenses. But what's growing most rapidly is the licensing in the corporate sector, and that's really come about over the last 10 years with the advent of the internet and email, because it's so easy to copy and share content these days, and oftentimes people don't know the rules. So it's really important to make sure that you protect your content from copyright infringement. And on the right hand side, we just have some companies that have a license with us at the moment. But I keep talking about this copyright license, but what actually is the license? Now, for the PR and ad and marketing industry, we have created a license called the Content Access license, and the PRC has recently come on board with a partnership. We signed this partnership in October 2015, and we committed to raise awareness on an ongoing basis about copyright law and how that affects PR and ad and marketing agencies, and to help increase the copyright compliance amongst them. As I mentioned, the Content Access license is tailored to your specific industry, and the PRC has actually done a great deal on your behalf as well. So if you do sign up this financial year for a copyright license, they have actually negotiated a 7.5% discount on your behalf. And if you are already a licensee, so before October, then when your new license year comes up, you will also be eligible for that 7.5% discount. And next financial year, that will actually go up to 10% as well. So that's quite significant. So well done to PRC for arranging that on your behalf. At the moment, I think the last score is about 111 PR agencies have already have a content access license in place, and thereby are making sure they actually don't breach copyright law. So it's quickly becoming an industry standard, and that's great to see the pickup in the agencies and trying to be compliant. So well done to all of you. Now, what's actually covered by the license? So it gives you those economic rights, so the rights to copy and communicate. So normally only a copyright owner has the rights to copy and communicate, but with our license you can actually copy and share others' content. This includes text and embedded works, so it excludes standalone images. So if you have a newspaper article and it comes with an image, you can copy that entire article including the image, but you can't just take the image from that article and copy and paste it elsewhere. If you do want to do that, you can't rely on a license, and you would need to seek separate permission. But generally speaking, if you want to send an article to your client, for instance, you would just send the entire article, just an image, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. Now, and what can you copy? What are the limits? You can copy entire newspaper articles, same for journal articles, or 10% of a book or a similar work. And what 10% of a book is actually, it's either 10% or it is one chapter, whichever is the greater. So if you have a book of 5 chapters, even though one chapter is bigger than 10%, you can actually copy the entire chapter, even though it's actually 20%. Now, similarly with a book of 20 chapters, if you have 20 chapters, you can copy 10%. So let's say all chapters are the same size, you can then actually copy 2 chapters. So whichever is the greater, 10% the chapter. You can also copy magazine articles, etc. So basically any literary work that you find, and it could be newspapers in hard copy format, but also found on the internet. Now, what are some of the uses then that you can do with it? Well, basically all the activities that we listed before in one of the first slides that we went through, that said if you do this, you have to make sure you have permission in place. Well, with our license, you actually have permission to do all these activities. So you can email internally, you can print something from the net or from an attachment, you can scan in newspaper articles, you can copy and paste lines from newspaper articles into management reports. You can take a screenshot online. You can include articles in presentations and that sort of thing. So basically, everything that you need to seek permission for is included. So that's all internal. There's also some external rights that come with our license, and these are optional, so it will depend on whether you wish to take this out. So if you already have a license with us, make sure that you check whether you have these rights. And if you don't have a license yet, just note that you can add these on. So posting to an internet website, some agencies choose to add it on because they find it quite helpful to be able to put some articles up on the website to showcase their work, but it's optional. And what most agencies will actually often have in place is the emailing of articles to their clients, and that's just so that you can share content with your clients without infringing copyright. Now I'll talk about these two in the next two slides. And what the license also allows you to do is reproducing in hard copy format. So for instance, the good old photocopying and faxing. So you can also do that by relying on the license. Now, as I mentioned, external use, there are some limits to it, and that's simply because publishers are quite wary of, once you share with others, that they can then unshare it again. So obviously they don't want you to be able to do it unlimitedly. So for the Australian newspapers and magazines, you can keep it on your website, but there are limits, as I mentioned. So every year, our standard license allows you to put up 12 newspaper articles, excluding the Australian Financial Review articles, and 6 Australian Financial Review articles, provided that you take out the Australian Financial Review addition to the license. Now, each article can only be posted up on your website for a 3-month period. So after 3 months, you will take it off. Now, if you are interested in being able to put up articles on your website, but you think, hang on, that 3-month period, it's actually not long enough, you can actually increase that to 12 months, but there will be an additional payment in place. So this is just what the standard licensing agreement comes with. But if you want to extend it to, for instance, have a longer period to be able to post it online, or if you want to be able to put more articles online, that can all be negotiated on a one-by-one basis. But the standard license comes with these limits. Now, we do ask you to keep track of what you send externally, either through sending it to your clients or by posting it on your website. And that can be as simple as just keeping an Excel spreadsheet or just emailing yourself a copy of the article that you're publishing online. And the other thing that we do ask of you is to make sure that people notice that it's actually a licensed copy if you put it online. So we have a little stamp there that we ask you to put up with the actual article. And we will provide you with instructions on how to do that as well if you sign up for a license and take out the website usage rights. Sorry, I just had a sip of water. And then the other thing that we have in place also is the emailing to clients. So if your clients have been in the news and they ask you to do their media monitoring on their behalf, you can actually send them those articles, provided you take out those rights with your license. And most of you that are here today and that have a license, you actually have these rights in place. So then it will depend on each client. How many articles do you want to share with them on an average monthly basis? So for instance, that first category that you see in the table is the occasional category. That's the lowest category. And that allows you to share up to 10 newspaper articles per client and an extra 2 AFR articles per client if you have taken on the AFR rights. So that allows you to share 12 articles per month on average. So let's say 1 month you only share 6 articles. That means the other month you can actually share 18. As long as over the course of a year, it averages out to be that 12. So it will be a matter of working out for each client, and it might be hard to project. So we ask you just to do a best estimate of this, and then every year we can change this anyway. So just project what you think for each client, how much you want to share with them, and after every year we will ask you to update those details anyway. And as part of the license agreement, we do ask you to keep a full record of the amount of articles you send and which articles they are. And the easiest way it has appeared throughout the industry after feedback is to just send to just BCC in an email address. Call it something like copyright at whatever your agency name is .com. And every time you actually send an article to your client, you can just BCC that address in, and in that way you always have a log of what you've actually sent. Or you can even do it per client. So if you have 10 clients, you can set up 10 different email addresses and call it client A, client B, client C, etc. It's up to you how you want to do it. Some organizations prefer to do it in a spreadsheet, but that may be quite onerous. Also, again, since it's external sharing, we do ask you to put a little notice in the email footer. So it says licensed by the copyright agency, you must not copy this work without permission. But that shouldn't be too much of a problem to pop that in your footer. So we try and make it as easy as possible for you guys to do. Now there's two reasons why we ask you to keep full records. One is if we do ask you for data, if we do ask you for the records, we actually know who to pay out. So what we do is we collect the license fees but then pay it back to the copyright owners. So we want to know what sort of material gets produced. So every year we go into about 5 or 10 different PR agencies and say, can you give us a copy of what you've actually shared? So that helps us in actually distributing that money back to the copyright owners whose content has been used. But also it helps you to keep track of how many articles have we actually sent over the past year. So if I contact you once you've had a license, I'll probably be in touch after 11 months, just before the new license year starts. And then I say, listen, last year you were covered to share with this many clients and you had this sort of sharing in place. Is that still relevant? So instead of you guessing, yeah, that might still be relevant, you can actually look at your log and you can see, oh yes, we did actually share this with this client, so that's still in place. Oh, we actually did share a bit more with this client, so maybe we need to go up a category. Or hey, hang on, we actually went down a bit as well. So we can then amend that to what you actually need, and we will do that every year. So if you sign up now and you may not really realize or know how much you might want to share, you can change that after every year anyway. And then what sort of content is covered? So whose content can you actually copy and share? So as I mentioned, in Australia we have 26,000 members, and one of those is Fairfax, one of them is News Corp, one of them is Bauer Media. So all of their publications you can copy and share from. So in Australia we are quite certain that most of the publications that you will use on a daily basis are covered. It sometimes may happen that a blogger isn't covered, but what will happen in that case is that if we do find you having used something from a blog, that we do contact that person and say, listen, your work has been used by someone, and would you like to see payment? And generally speaking they say, yes, of course, we wish to. So in that case that's fine as well. And then we also have bilateral agreements in place. I think at the moment we have 34 bilateral agreements in place with other organizations like us worldwide. So think for instance of the United Kingdom, the United States, most English-speaking countries we have a bilateral agreement with, and the same with most European countries, some other countries as well. So if you do find some content from, for instance, the United States or the UK, one of their newspapers, well, you can actually use that too. And then thirdly, what we have in place is an indemnity. So what that means is if you do happen to copy something or share something and they are not a member either from the copyright agency or from one of those sister agencies in other countries that we have a bilateral agreement with, what will happen oftentimes is we will pick that up and they will become a member, so it's not an issue. But what has happened once in the past is that one specialist financial publisher found out that their work had been used by a major Australian bank, and even though that Australian bank had a license with us, that specialist financial publisher, which was an American publisher, they were actually not part of they were actually not a member of the American copyright agency, and they said, we also don't want to become a member of the copyright agency, we just want to see payment for the infringement that happened in that bank. So what happened was we also provide an indemnity. So what that means is if someone says, listen, you have infringed our work, if you come to us and you have a license, we will actually take that on board, mediate with that publisher or with that author, whoever it may be, and say, listen, these guys are trying to do the right thing, they've taken out a license, they're taking copyright very seriously, obviously they're trying to do the right thing, why don't you become a member, and obviously your work has been used, so we'll pay you a bit of money for that. But this publisher actually said, no, we don't want to become a member, we don't want to see payment for this, we just want to see a payment for the damages that have occurred by them sharing the articles without having the right permissions in place. So the indemnity doesn't only cover off us mediating, it will also cover you off for any monetary benefits that the party actually seeks. So that is limited up to the amount that you've paid us that far. So if you've had a license for 10 years with us, and let's say your license is $5,000 on an annual basis, you've paid us $50,000. So if someone does ever want to go after you for copyright infringement, we will actually help you pay up to that $50,000 as well. But as I mentioned, this hardly ever happens because people are happy to always become a member. It's just a rare occurrence that isn't the case, and I'm only aware of that one case where we actually had to rely on that indemnity clause. So it doesn't happen often, but in case it does happen, you have peace of mind that there is actually an indemnity in place. There are some specifically excluded works that you have to be mindful of. So that's the works that I've listed there. Most of them won't be too relevant to you, but have a look anyway. Song lyrics, for instance, is actually done by EPRA-MCOS because that's considered music. But otherwise, I don't think there's much of relevance in the newspaper or magazine sort of sector. So, but have a look on that website anyway, just to familiarize yourself with it. But there's not much that's excluded that would probably be of relevance to you. So in the end, what are some of the benefits then of having a content access license in place? Well, firstly, it provides you with that comfort that you're actually covered for copyright, and you don't have to worry about we're gonna get sued for copyright infringement, you know, and you're helping to comply with your legal obligations and so on. So that's quite powerful. Furthermore, you can copy and share a lot more content. So think of all the subscriptions you may have in place. So you're subscribed to a newspaper, but generally speaking, they don't come with further rights. So with our license, you can actually copy and share that content more easily than having to buy an extra newspaper or cutting it out and handing it out to someone. So you can actually communicate a lot more content, both within your organization, but also with your clients. And then lastly, it's also an ethical business practice, you know, that you're trying to do the right thing, and it also helps with corporate social responsibility, because the money, as I said, well, even though we collect it, it doesn't stay with us. We pay that back to the publishing community, and that's an industry that's struggling quite a bit at the moment. So any little bit that can help that industry stay afloat is definitely of great help. So all of you that already have a license, thanks so much for having one in place. If you do want to have some further information, please feel free to contact me. I just realized I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning of this session. So my name is Mike Verhoeven, and I'm a senior account manager here at the Copyright Agency. And these are my contact details. So feel free to contact me directly should you have any questions about the license you already have, or if you want to inquire about a new license. And now there is some time for some questions and answers, if you have any. Does anyone have any questions? It appears there are no further questions, but as I mentioned, if you do have any questions, just contact me directly. I'm happy to help you out. So that shouldn't be a problem. So thank you all so much for your attendance, and it was a pleasure presenting this to you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.